The thunder of hooves echoed against the rocky canyon walls as Meredith Evans raced through the darkness, her heart pounding in time with her horse's gallop. Tears streaked her face, whipped away by the night air as she fled from Sierra City, California, away from a future that had been decided without her consent, away from a marriage that would shackle her to a man 3 times her age. It was 1875, and at 22, Meredith had been given an impossible choice by Judge Harrington. Marry wealthy mine owner Silas Thornton to settle her late father's debts, or watch as her family's small ranch was seized by the bank. The arrangement had been made with cold calculation, the wedding set for tomorrow at noon. "Please, Maple," she whispered to her chestnut mare, leaning low over the horse's neck. "Just a little faster." The sound of another rider approaching made her blood run cold. She wasn't an experienced enough horsewoman to outrun a skilled pursuer. Had Thornton's men already discovered her missing? She urged Maple off the trail and into a stand of pines, hoping the darkness would conceal her. The rider slowed, and Meredith held her breath as the silhouette of a man on horseback came into view. The moonlight caught the brim of his hat, the glint of a rifle strapped to his saddle. "I know you're there," a deep voice called out. "No need to hide. I'm not looking for trouble." Meredith remained still, one hand reaching for the small revolver tucked in her saddlebag, her father's final gift. "The trail ahead isn't safe for a woman alone," the man continued. "Mountain lions have been spotted near Eagle Pass." Something in his tone made Meredith reconsider. This wasn't the voice of one of Thornton's thugs. She guided Maple forward cautiously, keeping one hand near her weapon. "I'm not going back," she declared, chin raised despite her trembling voice. "Judge Harrington forced tomorrow's wedding, but I won't be there." The stranger's face came into view as he shifted in his saddle. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes that held a quiet intensity. His clothes were trail-worn but well kept, the practical attire of a man who lived in the saddle. "Then ride with me before sunrise," he said, his voice low but clear in the still night. "I know these mountains better than Thornton's men ever will." Meredith studied him, suspicion warring with desperation. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." A slight smile crossed his face. "Brock Lawson," he offered. "I've had my own run-ins with Judge Harrington and his particular brand of justice. Let's just say I understand the need to chart your own course." He extended a gloved hand. "What's your name, madam?" "Meredith Evans," she replied, still hesitant. "Where would we go?" "North. I've got a friend with a place near the Nevada border. You'd be safe there until you figure out your next move." Brock's horse pawed at the ground impatiently. "But we need to decide quickly. Those clouds are moving in and we'll lose the moonlight soon." Meredith glanced back toward Sierra City, then to the open trail ahead. Her options were few and time was running short. With a deep breath, she made her decision. "Lead the way, Mr. Lawson." Brock nodded, turning his horse northward. "Stay close. There's a storm coming." They rode in silence for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the Sierra Nevada foothills. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of rain. Meredith's thoughts raced faster than her horse, questioning her decision with every passing mile. "May I ask why Judge Harrington is forcing you to marry?" Brock asked, breaking the silence. Meredith stiffened but found herself answering. "My father died 6 months ago. The drought last year hit us hard and he took loans from Thornton to keep our ranch afloat. When he passed, Thornton called in the debts immediately. Judge Harrington is his cousin. They arranged everything between them, my hand for the debt. And your mother died when I was 12. It's just me now. My brother left for the gold fields up north 3 years ago. We haven't heard from him since." Brock was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "What about you?" Meredith asked, eager to shift attention from her troubles. "What's your quarrel with the judge?" A shadow crossed Brock's face. "That's a longer story. Let's just say Judge Harrington has a habit of deciding men's fates based on the size of their purse rather than the facts at hand." The first drops of rain began to fall, cold against Meredith's skin. "There's a line shack about 2 miles ahead," Brock said. "We can wait out the worst of the storm there." The rain intensified, and by the time they reached the small wooden structure, both were soaked through. Brock dismounted first, quickly tying his horse under the shelter of a pine before helping Meredith down. His hands were strong but gentle at her waist, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as her feet touched the ground. The shack was basic but dry, a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Brock busied himself with starting a fire while Meredith stood awkwardly by the door, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. "I know this isn't ideal," Brock said, reading her expression, "but it's better than pneumonia. You take the cot. I'll sleep in the chair." Meredith nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as she watched him work. In the growing light of the fire, she studied him more carefully. His hands were calloused but moved with surprising grace as he arranged kindling. A scar ran along his right forearm, disappearing beneath his rolled sleeve. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of Sierra City's wealthy gentlemen, but there was something compelling about his weathered features. "How do you know this place is here?" she asked. "I worked as a trail guide before I started ranching," Brock replied. "These mountains have been my home since I was 16. Once the fire was crackling, he rummaged through his saddlebags and produced some jerky and a canteen. "It's not much," he said, offering her a share, "but it'll hold us until morning." Meredith accepted gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since noon the previous day. "Thank you for everything." Brock merely nodded, taking a seat at the table. "Get some rest, Miss Evans. We've got a long ride tomorrow." Despite her exhaustion, Meredith found sleep elusive. Rain lashed against the small window, and thunder rolled across the mountains. But it wasn't just the storm keeping her awake. Her life had transformed completely in the span of a few hours, and she'd placed her trust in a man she barely knew. Yet somehow, in this tiny shack miles from anywhere, she felt safer than she had in months. She watched Brock through half-closed eyes. He sat motionless at the table, gaze fixed on the dancing flames, lost in thoughts she couldn't begin to guess. There was a sadness about him, a weight he carried that seemed to run deeper than mere weariness. Meredith closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of the rain. Whatever tomorrow brought, for tonight she was free from Thornton and the judge. For tonight, that was enough. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Brock was already outside when Meredith awoke, the cot empty except for his jacket, which he draped over her sometime during the night. The thoughtful gesture warmed her more than the garment itself. She found him tending to the horses, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. "Good morning," she called, approaching with his jacket. He turned, and for the first time she saw him in full daylight. His eyes were a deep blue, like the mountain lakes her father used to take her fishing at when she was a child. A faint smile touched his lips. "Morning. Sleep well." "Better than expected," she replied, returning his jacket. "Thank you." They ate a quick breakfast of dried apples from Brock's provisions, then saddled up and continued north. As they rode, the landscape changed, forests giving way to rocky outcroppings that afforded breathtaking views of the valleys below. "It's beautiful," Meredith remarked as they paused to rest the horses. "This is my favorite part of the range," Brock admitted. "Most folks stick to the main trails, never see any of this. How much further to your friend's place?" We should reach James's homestead by nightfall if the weather holds. Brock squinted at the horizon. He's a good man. Served with me in the war. Meredith nodded, hesitating before asking her next question. What will you do after you've taken me there? Brock's expression grew guarded. Head back to my ranch. I've been away too long already. And where is your ranch? East of Placerville. Small place, but it's mine. There was unmistakable pride in his voice. Started with just 20 acres and 6 cattle, got nearly 100 head now. You've done well for yourself. Been lucky, he said modestly. They continued riding, the conversation flowing more easily as the miles passed. Meredith told him about growing up on her family's ranch, her dreams of expanding their small herd, the books she loved to read when chores were done. Brock spoke of his time as a Union soldier, his wandering years after the war, and how he'd saved every penny to buy his land. By mid-afternoon, they had descended into a lush valley where a stream meandered between stands of aspen. Brock suggested they stop to rest the horses and eat. This is Apache Creek, he explained as they dismounted. Named for a skirmish between settlers and natives back in '58, it's peaceful now. They sat on the bank, sharing the last of Brock's provisions. The sun warmed Meredith's face as she removed her boots and dipped her feet in the cool water. What will you do at James's place? Brock asked after a comfortable silence. You can't hide forever. Meredith sighed, swirling her toes in the current. I haven't thought that far ahead. I just knew I couldn't marry Thornton. He's cruel. The way he treats his workers, his previous wife. Previous wife, she died last year. There were rumors. Meredith hesitated. Rumors that her fall down the stairs wasn't accidental. Brock's jaw tightened. And Judge Harrington was going to force you to marry such a man. The judge only cares about his own interests. With Thornton as his cousin, they've controlled Sierra City for years. A troubled look crossed Brock's face. I've heard similar stories from other towns. Men like them are why I keep to myself these days. Meredith studied him curiously. You mentioned you had trouble with the judge. What happened? Brock was quiet for so long that Meredith thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 3 years ago, I caught one of Thornton's men rustling my cattle. I took him to the sheriff, but Judge Harrington dismissed the charges without a hearing. A month later, my barn burned down, lost nearly half my herd and my entire winter feed store. That's terrible, Meredith said softly. I rebuilt, started over. Brock's hands clenched, but I learned my lesson about Harrington's justice. The revelation hung between them as they prepared to continue their journey. Meredith found herself seeing Brock in a new light, not just as her rescuer, but as someone who understood exactly what she was running from. They rode through the afternoon, the landscape growing more rugged. Brock led them off the main trail several times, explaining that Thornton's men would likely be searching the common routes. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill and Meredith saw smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. James's place, Brock confirmed. We made good time. The homestead was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy log cabin with a barn and corral nestled against a backdrop of pines. As they approached, a tall man with a graying beard emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. Who goes there? He called. It's Brock Lawson, James. I've brought a friend. James lowered his weapon, a broad smile replacing his wary expression. Brock, been too long. His gaze shifted to Meredith. And who might this lovely lady be? Meredith Evans, Brock replied. She needs a safe place to stay for a while. Understanding dawned in James's eyes. Trouble with the law, with those who twist it, Brock said meaningfully. James nodded. Well, any friend of Brock's is welcome here. Come inside. My wife Mary will be pleased to have female company. As they dismounted, a woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face lit up at the sight of Brock. "Look what the wind blew in," she called warmly. And with a companion, no less. Introductions were made, and soon Meredith found herself ushered inside the cozy cabin. The interior was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts brightening the space. The smell of stew simmering over the fire made Meredith's stomach growl. Mary, a kind-faced woman with laugh lines around her eyes, immediately took Meredith under her wing. "You poor dear, you look exhausted. Let me show you where you can freshen up while the men see to the horses." Meredith followed gratefully, glancing back to see Brock and James heading to the barn, deep in conversation. There was something comforting about the easy friendship between the two men, a reminder of simpler, more honest relationships than those she'd left behind in Sierra City. Later, over bowls of venison stew and fresh baked bread, James asked the question Meredith had been dreading. "So what brings you out this way with our friend Brock?" Meredith exchanged a glance with Brock before replying. "I was to be married against my will tomorrow, to Silas Thornton," Mary gasped. "That dreadful man, the one who owns the Silver Creek mine," Meredith nodded. "The same. Judge Harrington arranged it to settle my father's debts." "Judge Harrington," James spat the name. "That man has blood on his hands." "James," Mary cautioned with a pointed look toward their guests. "It's all right," Brock said quietly. "Miss Evans knows about my history with the judge." James studied Meredith with new interest. "Well then, Miss Evans, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. We don't get many visitors this far out, and Mary's been wanting company." "Thank you," Meredith said sincerely. "I won't impose for long. I just need time to figure out my next steps." After dinner, while Mary showed Meredith to a small bedroom off the main living area, Brock and James stepped outside. Through the window, Meredith could see them standing in the yard, their faces serious in the lantern light. "He's a good man, you know," Mary said, following Meredith's gaze. "Brock, I mean. James says he's the most honorable man he's ever known, and my husband doesn't give praise lightly." "He risked a lot to help me," Meredith acknowledged. Mary smiled knowingly. "And I suspect he'd do it again in a heartbeat, the way he looks at you." "We barely know each other," Meredith protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Mary said simply. "James asked me to marry him 3 weeks after we met, when it's right, you know." Meredith didn't respond, but her eyes drifted back to the window, where Brock's tall figure was outlined against the night sky. Later, unable to sleep despite the comfortable bed, Meredith slipped outside. The night was clear, stars scattered across the heavens like diamond dust. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked toward a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. "Couldn't sleep," Brock's voice startled her. He sat on the far end of the log, a cup of coffee in his hands. "Too many thoughts," she admitted, taking a seat beside him. "May I join you?" He nodded, offering his cup. "Coffee," she accepted, taking a small sip. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "You'd have found another way," Brock said with surprising conviction. "You strike me as a woman who doesn't give up easily." Meredith smiled ruefully. "I'm not sure that's true. I was ready to run with no real plan beyond getting away. Sometimes that's enough to start with." Brock looked up at the stars. "James says you're welcome to stay as long as you need. I heard. They're very kind. They are." Brock hesitated. "I've been thinking about your situation." Meredith tensed. "What about it?" "Thornton won't give up easily. Men like him, their pride won't allow it, and legally with the judge in his pocket." "I know," Meredith sighed. "I'll need to go further, maybe to San Francisco." "I could find work there." "A woman alone in San Francisco." Brock's voice held concern. "It wouldn't be easy. I don't have many options." Brock was quiet for a long moment, his profile illuminated by moonlight. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "There is another possibility." Meredith waited, sensing his hesitation. "You could come with me to my ranch." He rushed on before she could respond. "Just until you decide what's next. It's isolated but comfortable. No one would think to look for you there." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Meredith studied his face, finding only sincerity in his expression. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked softly. Brock looked away. "Because I know what it's like to have your choices taken from you, and because—" He trailed off, then met her eyes directly. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've come to admire your courage." Something shifted in Meredith's chest, a warm, unfamiliar sensation that both frightened and exhilarated her. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to decide tonight," Brock assured her. "Think about it. I'll be here for 2 more days before I head back." They sat in companionable silence, sharing the coffee and watching the stars until the chill drove them back inside. Over the next 2 days, Meredith found herself drawn more and more to Brock's quiet strength. They rode together in the mornings, exploring the hills around James's property. Brock taught her how to track game and find water in seemingly barren landscapes. In the afternoons, she helped Mary with chores, learning the older woman's recipes and techniques for managing a remote homestead. The decision formed gradually in Meredith's mind, solidifying on the evening before Brock was set to depart. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, listening to James tell stories of his and Brock's adventures during the war. And there was Brock, standing in the middle of that creek, holding his rifle over his head with one hand and dragging me with the other. James laughed. "Saved my life and half the company's ammunition in one go." Mary shook her head fondly. "You never told me that one." "Some stories are better left in the past," Brock said quietly. "Not the ones that show a man's character," James countered. "Miss Evans should know what kind of man you are." Meredith noticed the flush creeping up Brock's neck and took pity on him. "I think I've seen enough of Mr. Lawson's character these past days to form my own opinion." "And what opinion might that be?" Mary asked with twinkling eyes. Before Meredith could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. James was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Were you expecting company?" Brock asked, already moving to position himself between the approaching riders and Meredith. "No," James replied grimly. "Mary, take Miss Evans inside." But Meredith stood her ground. "If it's Thornton's men, I won't hide." The riders came into view, 3 men, their horses lathered from hard riding. Brock's hand went to his holster, but James placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," the older man said. "I recognize the lead rider. That's Sam Porter, runs the trading post 10 miles north." As the men drew closer, they slowed their mounts, raising their hands to show they meant no harm. The leader, a weathered man in his 50s, called out, "James." "Thought that might be your place I saw from the ridge." "Evening, Sam," James replied cautiously. "What brings you out this way?" Sam dismounted, approaching the porch. His gaze swept over the group, lingering on Meredith before returning to James. "Been a bit of excitement down in Sierra City. Thought you should know, being as how you get travelers passing through." Meredith felt her heart pound against her ribs. "What kind of excitement?" James asked. "Judge Harrington's been shot," Sam announced. 2 nights ago, not dead but in a bad way." Town's in an uproar, especially since the prime suspect is his own cousin, Silas Thornton. Meredith gasped, drawing Sam's attention. "Begging your pardon, miss," he said, removing his hat. "Didn't mean to speak of such violent matters in front of a lady." "It's quite all right," Meredith managed. "Why would they suspect Mr. Thornton?" Sam seemed eager to share the gossip. Well, seems the judge had arranged a marriage for Thornton with some local girl who ran off. When she disappeared, Thornton accused the judge of warning her somehow. They had a mighty row at the saloon, according to witnesses. Next morning, Judge was found shot in his chambers. Brock's hand found Meredith's elbow steadying her. "Is Thornton in custody?" he asked. "That's the thing," Sam continued. "He's denying everything, claiming he was out searching for the girl when it happened. Sheriffs gathered a posse to look for her, thinking she might know something. They're offering a reward for information." Meredith felt the blood drain from her face. James, noting her distress, stepped forward. "Appreciate the news, Sam. You and your men are welcome to water your horses before you head back." Taking the hint, Sam nodded and returned to his companions. As soon as they were out of earshot, Meredith turned to Brock. "I need to go back," she said firmly. "I can't let an innocent man be blamed for something he didn't do." "Innocent?" Brock's eyebrows rose. "Thornton is many things, but innocent isn't one of them." "But he didn't shoot the judge. How could he have? He was preparing for our wedding." James and Mary exchanged concerned looks. "Miss Evans," James said gently, "returning now would be dangerous. If Thornton is desperate enough to shoot his own cousin, what might he do to you?" "But if he didn't do it, then who did?" Brock interrupted. "Think, Meredith. Who else had reason to want the judge harmed?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Meredith's eyes widened as she looked at Brock. "You don't think Of course not," he said quickly. "But others might, especially with a reward offered." Mary stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Meredith's shoulder. "Let's discuss this inside. Sam and his men will be leaving soon, and these matters require privacy." Once inside, Meredith paced the small living area while the others watched in concern. "I can't be responsible for an innocent man going to prison," she insisted. "Thornton is hardly innocent," Brock countered. "And we don't know for certain he didn't shoot the judge. Maybe their argument was about something else entirely." "Or maybe someone else entirely is responsible," James suggested. "Judge Harrington has made plenty of enemies over the years." Meredith stopped pacing, a thought suddenly occurring to her. "What if that's it? What if someone used the confusion of my disappearance and Thornton's anger as cover to settle their own score with the judge?" Brock considered this. "It's possible, but who?" "I don't know," Meredith admitted. "But I can't stay hidden while an investigation focuses on the wrong direction. I need to tell what I know." "And what exactly do you know?" Brock asked. "That you ran away to avoid a forced marriage. That doesn't clear Thornton or point to another suspect, but it provides context. And my testimony about the judge's corruption might lead to other investigations, other people who had reason to want him dead." James cleared his throat. "She has a point, Brock, and sometimes running makes you look guilty of more than you are." Brock's expression darkened. "Going back puts her directly in Thornton's path. If he didn't shoot the judge, he'll still want to force the marriage. If he did, he might want to silence anyone who could connect him to the crime." "I won't be going alone," Meredith said, her eyes meeting Brock's. "Will I?" The question hung between them, a challenge and a plea combined. Brock held her gaze for a long moment before sighing deeply. "No," he said finally. "You won't." The decision made, they formulated a plan. They would leave at first light, taking a roundabout route to Sierra City. Rather than going directly to the sheriff, they would speak first with Meredith's family lawyer, a man named Hammond, who had opposed her father's dealings with Thornton from the start. That night, as Mary helped Meredith prepare for the journey, the older woman offered advice along with spare clothing. "You've sparked something in Brock I haven't seen before," she said as she folded a shawl into Meredith's small pack. "In all the years we've known him, he's kept people at arm's length, even James, his closest friend. "He's a good man," Meredith said softly. "Yes, but a wounded one. Life hasn't been kind to him." Mary paused her work, looking directly at Meredith. "Be gentle with his heart, whatever you decide." "I don't know what you mean," Meredith protested weakly. Mary's knowing smile said otherwise. "Just remember that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it takes more courage to stay than to run." The words stayed with Meredith as she tried to sleep, mingling with her concerns about returning to Sierra City. What awaited her there? Justice or further injustice? And what of Brock? She'd come to rely on his steady presence in just a few days. The thought of parting from him after their business was concluded left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. Dawn arrived with a light rain, the sky gray and forbidding. Brock was already in the barn when Meredith came down for breakfast, preparing their horses for the journey. James had provided them with ample provisions and a detailed map showing lesser-known trails back to Sierra City. "Weather's not ideal," James commented as Meredith ate a quick breakfast, "but the rain should keep most folks indoors. Less chance of being spotted on the road." Meredith nodded, too nervous for much conversation. The reality of returning to face Thornton and possibly a murder investigation weighed heavily on her. When it was time to leave, Mary embraced her warmly. "Remember what I said," she whispered, "and know you're always welcome here." James clapped Brock on the shoulder. "Watch yourself. That badge on the sheriff's chest doesn't mean he can't be bought." "I know," Brock replied grimly. "We'll be careful." With final farewells exchanged, they mounted up and rode out into the drizzling rain. Brock led them west initially, away from the main road, before cutting south through a series of narrow valleys. "This route will take longer," he explained, "but it's safer. We should reach Sierra City by tomorrow evening if we make good time." They rode in silence for the first few hours, each lost in thought as the rain gradually subsided. By mid-morning, the clouds had parted enough to allow weak sunlight through, warming their damp clothes. "I've been thinking about what you said," Meredith ventured as they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream. "About who else might have wanted to harm Judge Harrington." Brock handed her a canteen. "And there was a trial last year, a miner accused of stealing from Thornton's mine. Everyone knew he was innocent. Thornton's foreman was the real thief, but the judge sentenced him to 10 years. His wife. She confronted the judge publicly, said he'd answer to a higher court someday. What happened to her? She left town after that, but her brother still runs the livery stable. Daniel Morris. He never spoke against the judge directly, but he refused to serve him after that. Brock considered this. Anyone else? Too many to count, Meredith admitted. The judge ruled in Thornton's favor in every dispute, no matter the evidence. He seized Widow Gardner's property for back taxes while allowing Thornton to defer payments on his holdings. He dismissed assault charges against Thornton's mine guards when they beat a union organizer nearly to death. Justice for sale, Brock muttered. All too common these days. Yes, but Judge Harrington was particularly blatant about it. Meredith hesitated. There's something else. A rumor that the judge had evidence about what really happened to Thornton's wife, that he was using it to control Thornton, not just help him. This caught Brock's attention. What kind of evidence? I don't know. It was just something I overheard once at my father's funeral. Two men talking, not realizing I was nearby. Meredith shuddered at the memory. They said the judge had Thornton by the short hairs because of what happened to Eliza Thornton. Brock's expression grew thoughtful. If that's true, it changes things. Thornton would have more motive to silence the judge than just an argument over your disappearance. But we can't prove any of it, Meredith pointed out. It's just gossip. Sometimes gossip has a grain of truth, Brock replied. And sometimes that grain is enough to plant seeds of doubt. If we can get the sheriff to look more closely at Thornton's relationship with the judge beyond your marriage arrangement, then maybe they'll find the real reason for the shooting. Meredith finished. They continued their journey, the conversation shifting to less fraught topics as the day wore on. Brock told her more about his ranch, the house he'd built himself, the spring-fed pond where he'd taught himself to swim one scorching summer, the old apple orchard he was slowly reviving. In turn, Meredith shared stories of her childhood on her family's ranch, her father's dreams of expanding their holdings, the books she cherished that had been her mother's. With each mile, with each shared memory, the connection between them deepened. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove, far from any main trail. Brock built a small, nearly smokeless fire while Meredith prepared a simple meal from their provisions. As they ate, side by side in the firelight, Meredith found herself studying Brock's profile. "What is it?" he asked, catching her gaze. "I was just thinking how strange life can be," she replied. "A week ago, I didn't know you existed. Now I can't imagine facing tomorrow without you beside me." The admission slipped out before she could consider its implications. Brock's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "Life has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most," he said quietly. "I didn't plan to be riding through Eagle Pass that night. I don't know, something told me to take that route instead of my usual trail." "Providence," Meredith suggested. "Maybe." Brock set his plate aside. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I don't regret any of it, meeting you, helping you. Even though it's taking you back to a place you've avoided for years, even though it might be dangerous, even so." His hand found hers in the darkness, warm and steady. "Some things are worth the risk." The words hung between them, laden with meaning that neither was quite ready to voice. Meredith's heart quickened as his thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. She leaned toward him almost unconsciously, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Brock hesitated, his face inches from hers, searching her eyes for permission or doubt. Finding neither, he closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Meredith responded, her free hand moving to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Brock rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "Why not?" Meredith asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because tomorrow will be complicated enough without." He pulled back slightly, regret in his eyes. "Without feelings that might cloud our judgment." Meredith nodded, though disappointment coursed through her. "You're right. We should focus on clearing my name and finding the truth about the judge's shooting." After that, Brock left the thought unfinished, but his meaning was clear. After that, they would have time to explore whatever was growing between them, if they survived what awaited in Sierra City. They set out at dawn, the final leg of their journey taking them through increasingly familiar territory for Meredith. By mid-afternoon, they could see smoke rising from Sierra City's chimneys in the valley below. "We should approach from the east," Brock suggested. "Less visible that way. We can reach Hammond's office without crossing the main square." Meredith agreed, though anxiety tightened her chest as they descended toward the town. The comfortable rapport they'd established during their journey gave way to tense silence, both acutely aware of the dangers they might face. Sierra City looked unchanged as they rode in, keeping to back streets. The mine whistle blew, signaling the end of the day shift as they tied their horses behind the small building housing Jeremiah Hammond's law practice. Brock peered through the window before knocking quietly on the back door. The door opened cautiously, revealing an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose. His eyes widened at the sight of Meredith. Good heavens, child, you're the talk of the town. He ushered them inside quickly, locking the door behind them. And who is this, Jeremiah? This is Brock Lawson. He helped me when I fled. Brock, this is Jeremiah Hammond, my father's lawyer and friend. The men exchanged brief nods as Hammond led them to his cluttered office. You're taking an awful risk coming back here, Meredith. Thornton has half the county looking for you. We've heard about Judge Harrington, Brock said. That's partly why we've returned. Hammond sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. A nasty business, shot in his chambers after hours, no witnesses, though plenty with motive. Is Thornton still the main suspect? Meredith asked. He was, until yesterday. Hammond removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. They arrested Daniel Morris last night, found a revolver in his stable that matches the bullet they dug out of the judge's shoulder. Daniel, Meredith's hand flew to her mouth. But why would he? Revenge, Hammond said simply. For his sister, for his brother-in-law. You know how the judge ruined them. Meredith looked to Brock, distress evident in her expression. We were just discussing him yesterday. This can't be coincidence. Where is Daniel being held? Brock asked. Town jail. Trials set for next week, assuming the judge recovers enough to preside. Hammond's mouth twisted bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? The victim judging his own attempted murderer. That's if Daniel is actually guilty, Meredith pointed out. Hammond studied her closely. You have doubts. Meredith explained their theory about Thornton's possible deeper motive for wanting the judge dead, including the rumor about evidence related to his wife's death. When she finished, Hammond leaned back, stroking his beard thoughtfully. It's plausible. There were always whispers about Eliza's death, but proving it. We need to speak with Daniel, Brock insisted. Find out if he really did shoot the judge, and if not, why his gun was used. That won't be easy, Hammond warned. Sheriff Taylor is keeping him isolated. No visitors except immediate family and legal counsel. Then I'll be his legal counsel, Hammond declared, straightening in his chair. And I'll need my assistants, he nodded toward Brock and Meredith, to help prepare his defense. The plan formulated quickly. Hammond would arrange to visit Daniel that evening, bringing Meredith and Brock as his clerks. Meanwhile, they would remain hidden in his office, as Hammond sent his actual clerk to gather information about the judge's condition and the evidence against Daniel. As dusk fell, Hammond's clerk returned with troubling news. Judge Harrington's condition had worsened, infection setting in. The doctor gave him even odds of survival. More concerning, Thornton had been seen entering the sheriff's office shortly before Daniel's arrest, and again this morning. He's orchestrating this, Brock concluded. But why frame Daniel? Why not let suspicion fall on Meredith as the fleeing bride? Because a jilted bride might garner sympathy, Hammond suggested. Daniel, with his known grudge against the judge, makes a more convincing villain. Or, Meredith said slowly, Thornton knows something we don't, something that connects Daniel to the judge's shooting, even if he didn't pull the trigger himself. Hammond's clerk, a young man named Timothy, spoke up. There is something odd about the timing. According to Doc Winters, the judge was shot around 9 in the evening, but 3 different people saw Daniel at the Silver Dollar Saloon from 8 until well past midnight. An alibi, Brock noted. Yet they arrested him anyway, based on the gun, Timothy confirmed. Found hidden in his stable, which anyone could have accessed, Meredith pointed out. The livery stable is never locked. Hammond checked his pocket watch. It's nearly time. We should head to the jail now while most folks are at supper. They moved cautiously through the darkening streets, Hammond leading the way with Meredith and Brock following several paces behind, heads down to avoid recognition. The jail was a squat stone building at the end of Main Street, a single oil lamp burning in its window. Sheriff Taylor looked up from his desk as they entered, his weathered face showing surprise at the sight of Hammond. "Bit late for a social call, counselor." "Professional, not social," Hammond replied crisply. "I'm here to see Daniel Morris. I'll be representing him at trial." The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he assessed Meredith and Brock. "And who might these two be?" "My clerks," Hammond answered before either could speak. "Here to take notes." Taylor seemed skeptical but reached for the ring of keys hanging on the wall. 15 minutes, that's all." He led them to a cell at the back of the building. Daniel Morris sat on a narrow cot, his normally robust frame looking diminished in the confined space. He looked up as they approached, confusion crossing his face at the sight of Meredith. "Miss Evans, they said you'd run off." "Keep your voice down," Hammond cautioned as the sheriff retreated to his desk. "We don't have much time." Once Taylor was out of earshot, Meredith moved closer to the bars. "Daniel, they're saying you shot Judge Harrington." "It's a lie," Daniel replied vehemently. "I was at the saloon all evening. Ask anyone we know," Brock said. "But they found your gun." Daniel's face paled. "My gun? It was stolen 2 days ago. I reported it to Deputy Wilson, but he just laughed, said I probably lost it while drunk." Hammond pulled out a small notebook. "Did you see who took it?" "No, it was in my desk at the stable. I only noticed it was missing when I went to clean it." "Who knew you kept it there?" Meredith asked. Daniel shrugged helplessly. "Anyone who spent time at the livery, I suppose. I wasn't secretive about it." "Including Thornton's men," Brock pressed. A flash of understanding crossed Daniel's face. "You think Thornton set me up? That he shot the judge and used my gun? Or had someone do it for him?" Meredith suggested. "Daniel, do you know anything about evidence the judge might have had against Thornton, specifically regarding his wife's death?" Daniel glanced toward the front of the jail, then leaned closer to the bars. "Not evidence exactly, but my sister Louisa told me something once, before she left town. She said Eliza Thornton had come to her, scared, a few weeks before her death. Said her husband had threatened her, that she had proof of something terrible he'd done at the mine." "What proof?" Hammond asked sharply. Louisa didn't know, but after Eliza died, the judge visited Louisa. Asked a lot of questions about what Eliza had said. A month later, Thornton made a large donation to rebuild the courthouse after that fire, and the judge started ruling in his favor even more than before. The pieces began to fall into place. "Blackmail," Brock said quietly. "The judge was blackmailing Thornton with whatever Eliza had discovered, and when I ran away, disrupting their plans." Meredith continued. "It created the perfect opportunity," Hammond finished. "Thornton could eliminate his blackmailer and blame it on someone with a known grudge against the judge." Daniel gripped the bars tightly. "You have to help me. I didn't shoot anyone." "We believe you," Meredith assured him, "but we need evidence to convince the sheriff and the town." "Time's up," Taylor called, approaching the cell. "Say your goodbyes, counselor." Hammond nodded to Daniel. "We'll be back tomorrow. Try to remember anything else that might help your case." Outside, they walked briskly back toward Hammond's office, careful to avoid main thoroughfares. The night had grown cold, a reminder that winter was approaching the Sierra foothills. "We need to find Louisa," Brock said once they were safely inside. "She may know more about whatever evidence the judge had against Thornton." "She's in Sacramento, last I heard," Daniel had told them. "Working as a seamstress for a wealthy family there." "That's 2 days' journey at least," Hammond pointed out. "Daniel's trial is in less than a week." "Then we need to find the evidence ourselves," Meredith declared. "It must be somewhere in the judge's house or office." "Both will be heavily guarded," Hammond cautioned, "especially with the judge still recovering." Brock paced the small room, thinking. Who else might know about the evidence? Did the judge have a clerk, a confidant? His housekeeper, Meredith suggested. Mrs. Holloway. She's been with him for years, knows everything that happens in that house. Can you approach her? Brock asked. As the daughter of a respected rancher, you might gain her trust. Meredith bit her lip. Perhaps, but I can't exactly walk down Main Street without being recognized. Thornton still wants to force our marriage, judges shooting or not. We'll need a disguise, Hammond decided, and a distraction. They spent the next hour refining their plan. Meredith would visit Mrs. Holloway the following morning, disguised as a nurse sent by the doctor to check on the judge's condition. Meanwhile, Brock would create a distraction by staging an argument with one of Thornton's known associates at the other end of town, drawing attention away from the judge's residence. It's risky, Hammond warned, if you're discovered. We don't have much choice, Brock replied grimly. Daniel's freedom depends on us finding proof of Thornton's guilt. They spent an uncomfortable night in Hammond's office, taking turns keeping watch. At dawn, Timothy arrived with the nurse's uniform borrowed from his sister and news that the judge's condition had stabilized overnight. The whole town's talking about it, he reported. Some are saying it's a miracle, others that the devil looks after his own. As Meredith prepared her disguise, pinning her hair beneath a nurse's cap and practicing the authoritative walk she'd seen the town's midwife use, Brock pulled her aside. Be careful, he said quietly. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, leave immediately. We'll find another way. Meredith nodded, touched by the concern in his eyes. I will, you be careful too. Thornton's men won't hesitate to use force. I can handle them, Brock assured her, though his expression remained troubled. Just come back safely. The moment stretched between them, yesterday's kiss a tangible memory. Impulsively, Meredith rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips briefly to his. For luck, she whispered, then turned away before he could respond. Half an hour later, Meredith approached the judge's imposing residence, medical bag in hand. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her exterior remained calm as she knocked firmly on the front door. Mrs. Holloway answered, her stern face creased with worry. Yes. Good morning, madam. I'm Nurse Jenkins, sent by Dr. Winters to check on Judge Harrington's condition. Meredith kept her voice pitched lower than normal, hoping the woman wouldn't recognize her. Mrs. Holloway hesitated. The doctor was here just last night. Yes, madam. He's concerned about infection. This won't take but a moment. Meredith held up the bag containing actual medical supplies Timothy had procured. Finally, Mrs. Holloway stepped back, allowing her entry. The judge is resting. Try not to disturb him unnecessarily. Of course, Meredith murmured, following the housekeeper up the grand staircase. She'd been in this house only once before, for a civic reception her father had reluctantly attended. It was as ostentatious as she remembered, the walls adorned with expensive paintings and hunting trophies. The judge's bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. Mrs. Holloway knocked softly before opening the door. Nurse Jenkins to see you, Your Honor. Judge Harrington lay propped against pillows, his normally florid face pale and drawn. His right shoulder was heavily bandaged, visible beneath his nightshirt. He squinted at Meredith suspiciously. Don't know you, he said weakly. Where's Nurse Miller? Meredith approached the bed confidently. She's attending another patient, Your Honor. I'm filling in today. Doctor Winters sent me to check your dressings. The judge continued to study her face as she set her bag on the bedside table. For a terrifying moment, Meredith thought he might recognize her despite the cap and unfamiliar clothing. You look familiar, he muttered. Have we met? I doubt it, Your Honor. I've only recently arrived in town. Meredith busied herself removing bandages and ointment from her bag. Mrs. Holloway, would you mind bringing some fresh water? These dressings should be changed. The housekeeper nodded and left the room. The moment she was gone, Meredith abandoned the medical supplies and turned to the judge. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth," she said rapidly. "What evidence do you have against Silas Thornton regarding his wife's death?" Judge Harrington's eyes widened in shock. "What in blazes?" "There's no time," Meredith interrupted, removing her cap to reveal her identity. "Daniel Morris is in jail for shooting you, but we both know Thornton is behind this. What were you using to blackmail him?" The judge's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "Meredith Evans, everyone's looking for you, girl. Answer me," she demanded. "A man's life depends on it." Harrington's thin lips curved in a humorless smile. "Why should I help you? You've caused nothing but trouble. Running off like that made me look a fool." "Because Thornton tried to have you killed," Meredith pressed. "He used my disappearance as cover to get rid of you. Whatever hold you had over him, he decided it wasn't worth it anymore." Something flickered in the judge's eyes, fear, perhaps, or realization. "You're cleverer than I gave you credit for. The evidence," she insisted. "Where is it?" Footsteps in the hallway signaled Mrs. Holloway's return. The judge's gaze darted to the door, then back to Meredith. "My study," he said quickly. "Behind the portrait of Justice, small safe. Combination is 1849-23. Meredith replaced her cap just as Mrs. Holloway entered with a basin of water. "Thank you," she said, returning to her nurse persona. "Now, Your Honor, this might sting a bit." She went through the motions of cleaning and redressing the wound, asking appropriate medical questions while her mind raced. How could she access the judge's study? It would certainly be locked, possibly guarded. As she finished, the judge spoke again, his voice loud enough for Mrs. Holloway to hear. "Mrs. Holloway, please show Nurse Jenkins to my study before she leaves. I want her to fetch some papers for Dr. Winters regarding my treatment." The housekeeper looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." Meredith could scarcely believe her luck. "That's very thoughtful, Your Honor. Is there anything specific the doctor requested?" "He'll know when he sees it," the judge replied cryptically. "Mrs. Holloway will show you where to look." 10 minutes later, Meredith stood in the judge's study, heart pounding as Mrs. Holloway unlocked the door. "His Honor keeps important documents in the cabinet there," the housekeeper said, pointing to a glass-fronted bookcase. "I'll leave you to find what you need." The moment Mrs. Holloway departed, Meredith moved to the portrait the judge had mentioned, a somber depiction of Lady Justice, scales in hand. Behind it, as promised, was a small wall safe. With trembling fingers, Meredith entered the combination. 1849-23. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing several documents and a small leather pouch. Meredith quickly examined the papers, finding deeds, bank statements, and finally, a sealed envelope marked simply Thornton. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter in a woman's delicate handwriting, and a small key. The letter was from Eliza Thornton to her sister, dated 2 days before her death. "Dearest Louisa, if you are reading this, my fears have been realized. Silas discovered that I know about the accident at the North Shaft. The explosion was no accident. He ordered the safety inspections falsified to save money, then bribed the territorial inspector to look the other way. 23 men died because of his greed. I've placed the inspection reports and the record of payments in a deposit box at First National Bank. The enclosed key will open it. Should anything happen to me, please ensure justice is served. With love and fear." Eliza. Meredith's hand shook as she finished reading. Here was the evidence not just of Thornton's negligence that caused the mine disaster 3 years ago, but a motive for murder. If the judge had been using this to blackmail Thornton, The sound of voices in the hallway snapped her back to the present. Quickly, she folded the letter and pocketed it along with the key, then closed the safe and replaced the portrait. She was just turning back to the bookcase when the study door opened. Silas Thornton himself stood in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking her escape. "Behind him, Mrs." Holloway wrung her hands nervously. "I tried to tell him you were here on the judge's orders, Mr. Thornton, but leave us," Thornton commanded, not taking his cold eyes from Meredith. The housekeeper hesitated, then scurried away. Thornton stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Miss Evans, how unexpected to find you here, and dressed as a nurse, no less. Quite the little actress, aren't you?" Meredith backed away, putting the massive desk between them. "Mr. Thornton, I was just leaving." "I think not." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've caused me considerable trouble, my dear. The wedding preparations, the embarrassment of your flight, the questions from the sheriff. Most inconvenient." "I'm sorry to have been so inconvenient," Meredith replied, her mind racing for a way out. The window behind the desk was her only option, but they were on the second floor. "However, your return simplifies matters." Thornton moved closer, circling the desk. "We can still be married. The judge is recovering, the arrangements can be reinstated. Tomorrow, perhaps." "I'm afraid that's impossible," Meredith said, continuing to back away. "I've made other plans." Thornton's face darkened. "With that rancher who helped you escape?" "Yes, I know all about Brock Lawson, a nobody with a few acres and some scrawny cattle. You think he can protect you?" A cold fear gripped Meredith at the mention of Brock's name. "How do you know about him?" "Sierra City has eyes everywhere, my dear. Did you think your little disguise would fool everyone? One of my men recognized you entering this house an hour ago." Thornton's smile turned predatory. "By now, your rancher friend is likely enjoying the hospitality of my associates." Horror flooded Meredith's veins. Had Brock been captured? Was he hurt? Or was Thornton bluffing? "What have you done to him?" she demanded. "Nothing permanent. Yet." Thornton's hand moved to his jacket pocket. "That depends on you. Come quietly, agree to our marriage, and he'll be released unharmed. Resist, and—" He let the implication hang in the air. Meredith's fingers closed around the letter in her pocket. She had the evidence that could destroy Thornton, but using it now would put Brock in immediate danger if he wasn't already. "Why me?" she asked, playing for time. "There are plenty of young women who would gladly marry a man of your wealth. Why force someone who clearly doesn't want the arrangement?" Thornton seemed amused by the question. "Your father's land adjoins my northern mining claims. Geological surveys suggest the richest vein of silver continues beneath your property. Buying you was simpler than buying the land outright and more pleasurable." The casual cruelty of his statement steeled Meredith's resolve. This man had caused the deaths of 23 miners through negligence, had likely murdered his wife, and now threatened Brock. She would not become another victim. "I know about the North Shaft," she said clearly. "I know about the falsified safety reports. I know what you did to those miners, and I suspect what you did to Eliza." Thornton froze, his expression shifting from smug confidence to cold fury. "What did you say?" Meredith held her ground. "I found the letter, and the key to the bank deposit box, the evidence the judge was using to blackmail you." "You're bluffing," Thornton snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Meredith met his gaze steadily. "I wonder what the sheriff would make of it, or the families of those dead miners." Thornton's hand emerged from his pocket holding a small pistol. "Give me the letter," he demanded, all pretense of civility gone. Meredith's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "It's not here. I've hidden it. Shoot me and you'll never find it." "You're lying." Thornton took a menacing step forward, raising the gun. the study door burst open with a crash. Brock stood in the doorway, his own revolver aimed squarely at Thornton. Behind him, Sheriff Taylor and Hammond appeared, weapons drawn. "Drop it, Thornton," the sheriff ordered. Now, for a terrible moment, Meredith thought Thornton would shoot anyway, taking her with him. Then, slowly, he lowered the pistol. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Miss Evans and I were having a private conversation about our upcoming nuptials." At gunpoint. Brock's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Step away from her." Thornton complied, raising his hands as the sheriff moved forward to disarm him. Meredith rushed to Brock's side, relief washing over her at finding him unharmed. "I thought he had captured you," she whispered. "It was a bluff," Brock replied, his eyes never leaving Thornton. "We were watching the house. When he entered after you, Hammond fetched the sheriff while I came in through the service entrance." Sheriff Taylor looked between them, confusion evident. "Would someone explain what in tarnation is going on here?" "Miss Evans, you've been missing for days and now you're accusing one of our most prominent citizens of—" "What exactly?" Meredith produced Eliza's letter from her pocket. "Murder, Sheriff. 23 counts in the mine disaster 3 years ago, and one more his wife, Eliza Thornton." "Preposterous," Thornton blustered. "This is slander." "The letter is from Eliza to her sister," Meredith continued, handing it to the sheriff. "Written just before her death, and there's more evidence in a deposit box at the bank. This key opens it." She held up the small key. Sheriff Taylor read the letter, his expression growing grave. "This is serious, Thornton." "It proves nothing," Thornton insisted. "A hysterical woman's ravings, nothing more." "Then you won't mind if we check the deposit box," the sheriff replied. "And question you about Judge Harrington's shooting while we're at it." "The judge?" Thornton feigned surprise. "You can't possibly think I had anything to do with that unfortunate incident. You've already arrested the culprit, that stable owner with the grudge." "Daniel Morris is innocent," Brock stated firmly. "His gun was stolen and used to frame him." "Pure speculation," Thornton scoffed. "You have no proof I was involved." "Perhaps not yet," Hammond interjected, "but I suspect we'll find it in that deposit box. And I further suspect that Judge Harrington, once he understands you tried to have him killed, will be quite forthcoming about your arrangement." Thornton's confident facade began to crack. "This is absurd. I demand to see my lawyer." "You'll have plenty of time for that," Sheriff Taylor assured him, producing handcuffs. "After we've visited the bank and had a chat with the judge." As the sheriff led Thornton away, Meredith sagged against Brock, the tension of the confrontation finally catching up with her. His arm came around her, steady and supportive. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now." But it wasn't quite over. The next few days were a whirlwind of depositions and revelations. The bank deposit box contained exactly what Eliza had promised: falsified inspection reports, records of bribes, and a detailed account of Thornton's negligence that led to the mine disaster. Judge Harrington, facing his own legal troubles for blackmail and corruption, turned on his cousin, confirming that Thornton had indeed orchestrated the shooting, hiring one of his mine guards to use Daniel's stolen gun. Daniel was released from jail with the town's apologies. Thornton and the mine guard who had actually shot the judge were held for trial, this time before a circuit judge from Sacramento. The evidence against them was overwhelming. As for Judge Harrington, he resigned his position in exchange for immunity, leaving Sierra City for parts unknown. The scandal rocked the town, but ultimately began a process of healing as justice was finally served for the miners' families. Through it all, Brock remained at Meredith's side, a constant support as she reclaimed her father's ranch and began the process of rebuilding her life. They spoke little of what had passed between them during their journey, the kiss by the campfire, the growing connection they both felt. There was too much else demanding their attention. A week after Thornton's arrest, Meredith stood on the porch of her family home, watching the sunset paint the Sierra peaks in shades of gold and crimson. She heard Brock's footsteps behind her and turned to find him looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Hammond says the last of the paperwork is complete," he said, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "Your father's debts are officially cleared, and the ranch is fully yours." "Thanks to you," Meredith replied softly. "I would have lost everything if you hadn't helped me that night." "You would have found another way," Brock said, echoing his words from days earlier. "You're stronger than you know, Meredith Evans." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the pines. "I should be heading back to my ranch tomorrow," Brock said finally. "Been away too long already." Meredith's heart constricted at the thought of his departure. "Of course. You've already done more than anyone could ask." Brock turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you said that night at Hammond's, about how strange life can be, bringing people together." Meredith nodded, unable to find her voice. "I don't believe it was chance that brought me to Eagle Pass that night," Brock continued. "I think some things are meant to be, however unlikely they seem." He took her hand gently in his. "I know we've known each other only a short time. I know it's too soon to speak of certain things. But I also know that I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you." "Brock," Meredith began, but he shook his head. "Let me finish, please. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for time for us to know each other better, time to see if what began on the trail might grow into something more." His blue eyes searched hers. "Would you consider that?" Meredith's heart soared at his words. "I've considered little else since that night by the fire," she admitted. "But my place is here, and yours is at your ranch." "How would we? My ranch is 3 hours' ride from here," Brock pointed out. "Not so far that we couldn't see each other regularly. And perhaps someday, if things develop as I hope they might." He trailed off, leaving the possibility unspoken but clear. Meredith stepped closer, placing her free hand against his cheek. "I would like that very much," she whispered, "to see where this leads us." The kiss they shared then was different from their first, not rushed or uncertain, but a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. "Stay," Meredith said impulsively. "Not just tonight, but a few more days. Help me get the ranch in order before you go. It would give us more time." Brock's smile was all the answer she needed. Over the following months, their relationship blossomed. Brock divided his time between his ranch and Meredith's, helping her rebuild what her father had started. They faced challenges: drought, cattle thieves, the lingering suspicion some townspeople held toward Meredith for her role in exposing the corruption that had benefited many in Sierra City. Through it all, their bond strengthened. By the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the mountain meadows and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in both their herds, Brock asked Meredith a different question, this time with a simple gold ring and the promise of a shared future. Their wedding, held beneath the ancient oak tree where Meredith's parents had exchanged their own vows, was attended by James and Mary, who had traveled from their remote homestead for the occasion, and by Daniel Morris and his sister Louisa, who had returned to Sierra City once justice was served. In time, they combined their ranches, building a new home halfway between the two properties. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Meredith's father, was born the following winter, with a daughter, Sarah, arriving 2 years later. The children grew strong in the mountain air, surrounded by the love of parents who had found each other against all odds. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, Brock and Meredith rode to Eagle Pass, retracing the path they had taken that fateful night. As the sun set behind the western peaks, painting the sky in the same colors they had witnessed together so many times, Brock took Meredith's hand in his. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Meredith shook her head, smiling at the man who had become her partner in all things. "Not one. Though I still wonder sometimes how different our lives might have been if you hadn't decided to take that trail that night." "I don't wonder," Brock replied confidently. "Some things are simply meant to be. I would have found you somehow, even if it meant crossing mountains and deserts." "My hero," Meredith teased, but her eyes shone with the truth of it. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Meredith reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from desperate flight to hard-won freedom, from strangers to soulmates. The judge had indeed forced a wedding, but not the one he had intended. And the cowboy who had invited her to ride with him before sunrise had led her not just to safety, but to love. In the distance, lights glowed in the windows of their home, where friends waited to celebrate with them. Ahead lay many more years of challenges and triumphs, of laughter and tears shared. But in that moment, riding side by side through the twilight, they were exactly where they were meant to be together.